We'll do next time.
all about it, George. I'm sorry.
Spiritual Pizza
Will you forgive me?
with Buzz Coastin. Season 1, Episode 9.
Number 9.
Fire.
Number 9.
We're sorry. The number you dialed cannot be reached with the carrier access code you dialed.
Episode 9.
Number 9.
Fire.
Please check the code and try again, or call your carrier for assistance.
Morning coffee. That's great. Hey, dude. You know, the other day I heard that WayneO was saying that I said that he set the Bluff on fire in the book Spiritual Pizza. I didn't say that. I said the Bluff caught fire, and the only people living there were WayneO, Sage, and Cheyenne, and, well, Sage and Cheyenne were hot enough to set the Bluff on fire, but I don't know who did it, and it wasn't really a big fire. I'm going to tell you another story about WayneO. I'm going to tell you about the first time I met WayneO. And that was in the year 2003. I had just gotten back from Germany, and I was planning a wonderful second coming into Colorado Valley. And so, in order to make it a really great time there, I wanted to get a couple of ounces of weed to bring with me before I went in. So, I didn't know anybody in Kauai at the time, and I thought, well, how am I going to find any weed? So, I got in the car and started driving the highway looking for hippies hitchhiking. Eventually, I see these group of hippies, 3 of them, out there on the road with their thumbs out. I stop, pick them up. WayneO is the first guy to get in, and he's sitting shotgun with me, and the other 2 guys are in the back. We start driving towards the North Shore, and I ask this WayneO guy if he knows anybody selling pot. He says he does, and if I take him all the way down to the end of the road, he'll take me to the guy who's selling the pot. I think, well, you know, that's a pretty good deal. So I drive these guys down to KA. They're staying at Hyanna Beach at the state park. Anyway, WayneO says we got to drive up Waineha Road and go to a place that he's staying at. So we get to this overgrown patch of something. I can see some homemade structures scattered around the place. It looks kind of funky. And then the WayneO guy says to me, you know, he's going to want $3.50 an ounce and you want 2 ounces, so just give me the $700 and I'll run down there and get it for you. I said, hold on a minute, pal. I don't know you. I'm just going to hand over $700 and you're going to go get it and come back, and what's my security? He says, oh, these 2 guys in the back. I said, what am I going to do with a couple of burnt out hippies in the back if you don't show up with my $700 and no weed? He says, well, then you got to take me back to the park because that's the only way this guy is going to sell me the weed. So I do a little calculation. I think about it for a while, and I think, well, $700 won't kill me, and I could use the weed, so let's see what happens. So I bet the $700 on WayneO. He disappears into the jungle, comes back about 15 minutes later with 2 ounces of weed, and then the guys in the back now turn into beggars, and everybody wants some weed. Can you give me a little one, just a little pinner, just a little bit? And that's how I met WayneO. And I had no idea that WayneO was a Colorado outlaw, although at the time I should have known that. And eventually I would see WayneO again in the valley, and we'd catch up and talk story. And that's how I met WayneO. And WayneO, I did not say you set the Bluff on fire, brah. I just said you were up there when it happened to combust.
Hey guys, here we go. We got the top 6 answers on the board. Name something that gets passed around. Chris.
A joint.
A joint.
Fire on the Bluff, August 2007. Ho'opau ahi. To put out a fire. Fire. WayneO's girlfriend Sage awakened me from a sound sleep early one midnight. I had been dreaming about Sage just before her arrival. She was bearing an invitation to join the Colorado Valley Volunteer Fire Brigade. Buzz? The bluff is on fire, and WayneO could use your help. This was not what my dream with Sage was about. Wait, what? Say that again? The bluff is on fire? Then Sage went down through the Milo Grove looking for others to join the fire brigade. When she found Larry, he told Sage he was too messed up to help, and I was the only firefighter Sage found in the Milo Grove at the beach. Only a few days before the fire, I had arrived back in Kalalau Valley after a 3-year absence. My plan was to stay a month, after which I would start my consulting gig in Munich. After all that was behind me, my plan was to return to Kalalau Valley for the winter of '07. Maybe even meet Super Frank. The best laid plans of mice and outlaws. A Bert drop. The fire wasn't the only thing odd about this last long stay of mine. The trip into Kalalau started off on the wrong foot as well. Bert told me to meet him at Anini Beach at 6 a.m. Haoli sharp. Bert and his boat were helping me and 200 pounds of supplies get into the valley. So I stowed the supplies in double contractor bags, and these bags would be thrown overboard once we got near Kalalau Beach. After the bags were jettisoned from the hold, I would jump in the drink with them, swim to shore, and then retrieve them as they washed up. In that stash of supplies, I had several cases of beer, with which to pay the anticipated stevedores. Volunteers, I thought, would stream out of the Milo to help haul the supplies up to my camp. Once my supplies were on board his boat, Bert and I began to creep out the narrow Anini Channel. Just as we were exiting the channel, Bert spies someone on shore waving frantically. He then tells me that this waver was his other passenger, and we need to go back for him. That was pretty annoying. But even worse, the tardy passenger was Larry, or as I knew him back then, Scary Larry. Larry was far from being my favorite outlaw, and even though Larry and I were next-door neighbors on the bluff, we never spent much time together, except on our boat ride from hell in '04. Because of my personal preferences, I wasn't very happy with the way things were flowing. Larry, of all people. Kalalau Valley does have a sense of humor, but I was not laughing. Scary Larry. When we got back to Anini, Larry had a paper lunch bag of supplies, and who knows for how long. On the other hand, I had about 200 pounds for a month. But I had misjudged Larry once again, since Larry already had a stash in the valley. My judgmental attitude was ignorant of that fact. About 3 hours later, we arrived offshore Kalalau Beach, and it was now showtime. My bags were being thrown overboard, while the boat bobbed just about a hair's breadth from the shore break. Then it was all ashore that's going ashore, and Larry and I followed the bags into the drink. The surf was light and the bags were floating nicely. Once ashore, I started hauling them over the steep incline at the beachhead. Surprisingly, no stevedores rushed out of the Milo to help me. That was unusual given my previous Bert drops in Kalalau. Usually there were way too many stevedores, but not this time. So who did show up to lend a hand? Scary Larry. And not just lend a hand either. Larry busted some serious ass in the hot sun, hauling my heavy bags up to the Milo. It took us some time, but we eventually got it all up to the beach and stashed. I busted out some beers and we shared a few warm ones and talked story about old times. The Milo Grove. Originally, I had planned to move back into Bob's camp, but no one except WayneO and Sage were living on the bluff back then. Once I understood that, I decided to camp in the Milo Grove down by the beach. I found a camp at the very end of the Milo, as far away from the waterfall as I could get. Larry decided to camp closer to the waterfall and the tourist action. Therefore, we didn't see each other very much until the fire a few nights later. That fire kind of brought Larry and I together. Off to the bluff fire. After Sage left my camp, I was still a little groggy, but it did seem to me that knowing the extent of the fire damage would help me calculate what kind of ranger response to expect. The bluff was a mile from my camp, and I had to climb a steep incline to get to it. When I arrived at WayneO's, the fire was not as bad as I had imagined. The jungle floor was only smoldering. There were no big flames, and there was no raging fire. The twinkling embers looked like blinking Christmas lights. A group of us tried to organize the smoldering embers into a circle, and some of us tried throwing water on the smoking leaves. However, the water had to be laboriously hauled up from the river, which really slowed things down. Sunrise at the river crossing. Around dawn, I decided there was nothing more I could do to help, and so I headed back to the main trail and my camp to get ready for the coming ranger scratch. At the main river crossing, I ran into Larry and gave him an update. Larry suggested we get our shit together and head up valley to a safe spot that he knew about, and so we did just that. Larry's safe spot was very out of the way, so I was pretty sure we were well hidden in the jungle and safe from the rangers. So you can imagine my surprise when two newbie outlaws showed up. Somehow, they had managed to wander into Larry's well-hidden safe spot. The first arrival was a guy we called Shaun of the Dead. Shaun was a sad sack of a drainbow who was always in need of something that someone else had. Shaun was a drainbow because he never had anything anyone else needed and was always asking for something. Don't be like Shaun. As if to counterbalance Shaun of the Dead, in walks a semi-naked hippie chick. Cheyenne had managed to unconsciously find Larry's secret spot as well. Larry, just how safe is this place if these two bozos can stumble in here by accident? Larry had no good answer for that. But it was so Larry, and so Kalalau. Much to our surprise, there was no ranger scratch that day. Instead, a copter and a water bucket dumped seawater onto the bluff for about an hour or so. And that was the whole thing. No rangers came in for that event because they probably had no budget for it. So Larry and I went back to the beach in the late afternoon. The fire that day resulted in Larry and I spending more time together than ever before. This turned out to be for our mutual benefit and can be better explained in the next story. Right now I'm trying to think of a segue to get to that phrase, Damana is everywhere, but I can't think of one. Oh well, we'll just skip it. Outro. This podcast is a message in a digital bottle. Thanks for picking it up. For most of my life, I have walked the earth, met people, and got in adventures. Now, fast approaching my dotage, I'm releasing an eclectic mix of trippy memorabilia that I collected while walking the earth. Hope you enjoy the flashbacks from my trips. If you like this kind of thing, be sure to subscribe and tell your friends. And if you don't like it, well, be sure to tell your friends. And thanks for listening.
Go, go.